A water pipe from Tasmania to Victoria. Think it's ridiculous? Think again. The ocean floor behind me isn't exactly empty. There are telephone and data cables, an electricity main, and even a natural gas pipe already linking the mainland with the Apple Isle. So don't tell me we can't put a water pipe down there too. At its deepest point, the pipe would be just 75 metres below the surface, lying on a bed of sand. Compared to the pipes which link gas and oil rigs all over the world, this thing would be child's play. So, there is plenty of water in Tasmania's northwest, and a pipe would be relatively easy to build. But how much energy will it take to pump that water 360 kilometres to Melbourne? I mean, it's all uphill, isn't it? Actually, the water will flow without any pumping at all. Lake Sathana here is more than 200 metres above sea level, which means that if you start the pipe here instead of at the coast, then gravity will do the pumping for you. The weight or head of 200 vertical metres of water will push itself all the way across to Victoria without any pumping. It's really very simple. Water will always flow downhill, which means that if this is Lake Sathana and this is the Transtasman pipeline, then as long as the exit in Victoria is lower than the water level in Tasmania, then the water will flow. Gravity alone will do the pumping for us. Imagine that, water flowing from Tasmania to Victoria without using any electricity. Now that's not bad. Engineers estimate that the water will emerge in Victoria at more than 6 kilometres per hour. Multiply 6 kilometres by a 2.5 metre diameter pipe and you've got a heck of a lot of water flowing, 24/7, 52 weeks a year. In fact, this pipeline will supply about 350 gigalitres, which is more than 80% of Melbourne's current water consumption. And it'll do it without using any electricity. The desalination plant that I am such a fan of is costing us $3.5 billion to construct. The Trans-Tasman pipeline, $2.6 billion. The desal plant produces 150 gigalitres of water per year. The Trans-Tasman pipeline, 350. Less money, more water. And after 50 years, thanks to the massive ongoing cost of desalination, the Trans-Tasman pipe will cost a fraction of the amount whilst producing far more water. So, from a Victorian point of view, this Trans-Tasman pipeline idea is looking pretty darn good. But we need the Tasmanians to agree to it. So the next question is, what's in it for them? Well, it turns out there's plenty in it for Tasmania. Right now, Victoria buys electricity from the Forth River Hydro Scheme at $7 to $33 per megalitre of water. But if that megalitre of water was put into the pipe instead of through the hydro, then we'd pay $330 per megalitre, or 10 times the maximum that we're paying right now. That translates into $110 million a year of pure profit for the Tasmanians. But Victorians don't worry, because $330 per megalitre is still very cheap for water, and the retail price in Victoria will not change. That extra $110 million, that'll come from us buying more water as water restrictions ease and as our population grows, and not from us paying more per litre. So we know it makes financial sense for Tasmania. But what about the environment? I mean, Tasmania is famous for some of the most beautiful, untouched wilderness anywhere in the world, and the last thing we want to do is damage that. Well, let me remind you that the two rivers we're talking about have both already been dammed, and in fact this beautiful Lake Macintosh that you see behind me here, it exists because of a dam. Now 350 gigalitres of water, that's less than 7% of the combined annual flow of the Forth and Pyrmont rivers. So we're not going to be stressing the river systems at all. If you were the Tasmanian government and you were being paid $110 million a year to provide clean water, it'd make sense to spend some of those millions keeping your catchment areas pristine. You could actually argue that the Tasmanian government is being offered $110 million a year to look after the environment. Now that's a win-win if ever I saw one. So we already know it makes sense for Victoria, and for Tasmania, well, they get a very profitable export industry and incentives to look after the environment. Okay, so far so good. And remember that lack of infrastructure which was causing local water shortages in Tasmania? Well, $110 million a year would go a long way towards fixing that. But if the Trans-Tasman pipeline idea really is this good, wouldn't our government have built it already? And surely an idea this significant would be thoroughly addressed in the Victorian government's inquiry into Melbourne's future water supply. I mean, surely, right? No. All they say about it is that they have insufficient information. Now, I always thought the point of an inquiry was to get information. Apparently not. They actually admit that they received 4 submissions which mentioned the Trans-Tasman pipeline, and I've read all of them. I can tell you they had enough information to know that it was worth exploring. Perhaps the real problem was that they didn't want to know. The water in this pipeline will take 2.5 days to reach Victoria, where it can then be sold at the existing water rate per megalitre. In other words, this pipeline will pay for itself without an extra cent coming out of your pocket, unlike the desal plant. But here's the best bit. Last year, Melbourne used less than 400 gigalitres of water. So if we suddenly had an extra 350 gigalitres of water, 2 things would happen. Firstly, water restrictions would be a thing of the past. We'll be keeping beautiful gardens and green lawns and clean cars. Our kids can have water fights and play in sprinklers, and we could even fill our pools. Maybe our playing fields will have green grass again. Who knows? Maybe our number plates will start calling us the Garden State. Now that's a novel idea. Secondly, we'd have water to spare. We'd have a surplus of a few 100 billion litres of water every year, depending on the exact amount of rainfall here in Victoria. Our dams will fill in just a few short years, and then what will we do with our surplus? If I had my way, I'd give it to our farmers and to our rivers. So let me get this straight. If we pipe water from Tasmania where they have an abundance, then we can let it flow here in Victoria where it's desperately needed. Okay. This is getting a little bit complicated, but I think all that caffeine's worn off, which means it's time for a summary. Here goes. There's plenty of water in Tasmania, which can flow by gravity to Victoria, which means we'll have more cheap water than we can use, so we can restore natural flows to Victoria's stressed river system. And that's it. That's actually pretty simple, really. So it seems like the engineer's idea was pretty special after all, and we found our magic solution. Building a gravity-fed water pipe from Tassie to the mainland will provide us with heaps of water, help our environment, and keep water prices low, all for less than the upfront cost of the desal plant. The only question left is, why aren't we building it already? I don't know. I don't know why we didn't build this 20 years ago. I don't know why the government chose to ignore this in its inquiry into Melbourne's future water supply, and I certainly don't know why we're building a desalination plant instead. But the past is the past. What about now? How can we get our politicians to build this now? Well, right now, Labor can't afford to build the Trans-Tasman pipeline, because if they did, it'd make their desal plant look silly. So I don't think they're going to touch it. But what about the Liberals? What Liberals? Apparently they are in opposition here in Victoria, but I can't seem to remember them actually opposing anything. But don't despair. All is not lost. Because coming up in November, there's a state election, which is that one magical time every few years when our politicians actually care about what we want. Now imagine if everyone in Victoria had seen this video, if everyone knew what we know now. Well, then one or other of the major political parties in Victoria would have to promise to build it. It would be an election winner. We can make them build this just by making sure everyone knows about it. By sending this video to everyone you know, and by posting the YouTube link onto Facebook and Twitter and Twitface, whatever web thingy you're into, then we could be free of water restrictions and enjoying a greener, cleaner future in just a few years' time. Yeah, and then? Wait, hang on. I'm back where I started. Tim, we've gone a full circle. No, that's all right, Tim. I'll sort this one out myself. Our politicians don't seem to know how to fix the water crisis. I think it's time we told them how. My name's Topher, and that is my unpopular view.